welcome everyone to another REACHLaw webinar. Today, we're going beyond REACH and CLP, and we're going to talk about the general product safety regulation and what it changes for companies using chemicals. So we're very happy to have you all. We have a packed program today, so I'm going to take you through the logistics for today, and we're going to go right to the heart of the matter. So my name is Julien de Cruz, and I'm Head of Public Affairs here at REACHLaw Finland in Helsinki. Pleasure to be with you today. I've included here a link to my email and also for you to directly book a meeting with me. And I think my colleagues will also paste it in the chat. But then once you see those slides again, you just have to go to this link and then you get a calendar invite. It's pretty neat. If you want to talk about this topic or others. A few words about REACHLaw. For those who don't know us, we're a global consultancy based in Helsinki, and we have more than 50 colleagues working from different disciplines, legal, technical, scientific. We support you on all complex legislation that have, let's say, a chemical angle or a chemical link, but not only. And we serve a number of industries, not only chemicals, also oil, petrochemical, downstream users, metals, a number of user sectors like aerospace, electronics, etc., etc. You name it. We had to make it short for this slide. Check out our website. You have the link here. Our global coverage, that's what I was mentioning earlier. Finland, there was some layout error. Helsinki is not in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. It's a bit further, and Kiev is not here. So, but we're all over. We're all over the map on this slide. But I think you have basic grasp of geography, so you can put them back. The image of the world has shifted a bit to the bottom. But we are in Ukraine, Belgium, UK, Finland, Korea, and India, as well as Turkey. Network of professionals serving you. Get in touch with us and we'll fix that slide. A disclaimer for today. What we offer you today is simply information based on our knowledge and understanding, but please do not take it as formal advice. Any actions you take as a result of what you learned today is under your own responsibilities. We can't make any guarantee about the completeness or accuracy of the contents today. This is just a simple liability disclaimer. I think this is quite normal. You're used to those, but we just had to go through it. All right. Thank you for this. So now let's talk about the GPSR. So what we're going to do today, and who is this for? We have a very nice mix of representation today. We saw that we have regulatory, HSE, product stewardship, quality and functions professionals. So this is all for you. Today, this is going to be relevant for companies that use chemicals in consumer products or likely to be found in consumer products. You will see that there are fascinating questions as to whether you fall into that category or not, but also mixtures, articles, and substances as such that can be considered consumer products. And that's probably why you're here. So today, there's going to be two parts, really. One is a bit the masterclass, let's say, session, where for 30 minutes, we really try to give you all the essentials on what the GPSR means on top of REACH and CLP. So we really, with this chemicals focus, we tried to make it a bit, I was going to say fun for you, but let's say to give you an angle from where you are sitting, right? What the three biggest traps could be for chemicals using company. And on the back of those three traps, you will see that it captures actually some of the questions that you've sent and that we've grouped into themes. We'll have a short preview of what's coming also on the topic from the EU. But when those 30 minutes are done, we will have anyway a Q&A with you. Let's say we'll have Q&A sessions throughout the presentation, you will see. But if we have time at the end, we'll just open the floor and look in the comments where we are. So let's see how we are doing today with our timing, because we've got a bit less than 40 minutes left now. So the GPSR in a nutshell. So it's good to understand why the EU has updated those rules. There used to be a general product safety directive. Now it's a general product safety regulation, applicable since 13th of December 2024. So there were three big objectives, let's say, quite simply to modernize and update the general product safety framework for online and offline markets. So this is very classic that EU legislations have a revision clause. So this was planned anyway, that the Commission sort of takes stock of how it's been doing for, I think it had been around 15 years since the last update of the legislation, and update it to the current market situation, consumer markets, what's evolved. And there was a special need, let's say, identified issue to better tackle non-EU sellers and online platforms. So this has been really in the last 15 years, the sort of big rise in, I think we can't really name them here, but I think you've heard of these big platforms that import a lot of products from non-EU places, typically areas of the world where there's a really high manufacturing of products, but not necessarily to the same safety and quality standards as in the EU. So therefore, the GPSR is an attempt to take stock of that reality, okay? And also to extend general safety obligations across harmonized and non-harmonized products. We'll get to that, to this kind of legal bit, which is interesting for context really, that a lot of safety rules that were applying to, let's say, maybe certain specific subset of products have been also taken on board by the GPSR. So there's always a sort of objective for the Commission to simplify legislation when they can, or group pieces of laws that are a bit all over the place. So there was this kind of consolidation at work, of course. And another thing that's not really on the slide, because maybe not fully relevant for today, but a big angle that the Commission has been looking at, DG Justice, is the rise of products that have a digital component and an AI component. So there's sort of seeds in the GPSR to try and protect, to try and link with data protection legislation, but also with upcoming AI legislation. It's coming from the EU. So this was a sort of a bit last minute realization in the past 2-3 years that something had to be done there as well, because it's indeed all around us. Enforcement remains at the national level. So this is important to note, because you may have noticed that, yes, it's a directive. It used to be a directive and now it's a regulation, which means that the legal provisions are directly part of the law of the member states, but they're still the ones who have to enforce it, therefore, to a degree, to interpret the law when they are faced with cases of possible infringement. So you're still going to have, even though the regulation, let's say, would ease the level playing field, you will still have divergences between member states and even at local level on how this is going to be enforced. But you will see that the EU also is created, it has created with this update more updated coordination tools and platforms to have better exchange of information between enforcers. So what does it change? You know, this is a bit of a cheat sheet for you if you when you go back and you have to talk about this to others. Remember that the GPSR's focus is really the product level risks, right? So of course it's not a chemical legislation per se, like the ones we cover usually at REACHLaw. But the reason why we decided to talk to you about it is because the definition of what is a product and what is a consumer product may be broader than in the past, and the safety requirements definitely encompass chemical safety. And we've been getting questions, and we've been looking into it. So that's why this is relevant for today. When we talk about consumers, you will see later that it's really important that here we have, it's a legislation that's rooted, I want to say, like in the experience of the user, okay? So it's very different from your classical risk assessment mentality. Here, we try to look at the uses that are maybe, we need to be a bit creative into misuse and vulnerable populations. So you may have categories of risks under the GPSR that go beyond what you would consider normal use, maybe in a chemical context, okay? So it's really about those foreseeable risks, especially with vulnerable population. So we're gonna talk about children, for example. So that's an important thing to keep in mind for all of you who may be coming from the chemical world, let's say. So this is a bit new for a certain subset of stakeholders. So there's going to be needs for training and to get practical guidance about what you should do, because at the end of the day, it's meant to tackle very practical situations, accidents. So this is really one where the conversation should be with the segments of your company or your organization that directly deal with the users, in this case, the consumers. So we have this integrated safety approach in the GPSR that we're going to talk about a bit later, but it includes everything, basically, chemical, mechanical, and physical. But if there's something that I want you to remember for today, one thing, because we've been getting a lot of pictures, a lot of questions about scope, when does it apply? Try to remember this picture. The GPSR is a safety net. This is how it's been conceived by the legislator. This is how they call it, even sometimes. So it's not here to replace other pieces of legislation that already address chemical risk. No, it's here to catch any remaining risk that is not caught by those pieces of legislation. That's why it's a safety net. Okay, so you've got this girl is ready to catch the balls coming at her, but there's still a net behind her. So maybe that's the GPSR. Okay, so what does it look like in practice? If we were to make a chart, this is how it would look like. You have all of these legislation that I'm going to talk about, they fall under the EU market surveillance legislation, and that includes in the consumer protection and internal market titles the treaty, sorry. And so we have a GPSR is part of the consumer protection / internal market family and EU and market surveillance. So you have the GPSR that sets essential safety requirements for products offered to consumers. That's where it's for. And then it has two sister regulations. The Product Liability Directive, which we will talk about a little bit, which is meant to give implementation reality to the GPSR and certain ground rules for liability in case of accidents to be transposed into national legislation. And then we have also the strengthening of the market surveillance and mutual recognition in the EU, which is basically this network of market surveillance of member states to make them work together, because the EU is an internal market. You all know that. So we need member states to cooperate to catch those deficient products is basically the idea. But this is not working in a vacuum. So this is where the safety net philosophy gets into play. It does not come, let's say, on top. It comes as the net next to a long list of legislation that is listed in Annex 1 of the GPSR. And yes, it includes REACH, CLP, and the POPs regulations, but you're going to have other specialist products regulations on there, like the construction products regulation, the toy safety directive, cosmetics. So example, if you have a restriction in REACH, it's not replaced by GPSR, or GPSR does not cease to apply because you already have a restriction in REACH. No, the restriction applies. And on top of that, for any residual risk, so let's say you have a product that emits microplastics or whatever, banned from being placed on the market, but now you make it comply. It's still under the GPSR application in case there's any physical risks with this product. Can you choke with it? Can you fall on it? Things like that. Okay, we're gonna get to that. So it's the same. You have toys safety directive will apply, and the GPSR provisions still apply. Residually, everything that is not already covered in the legislation here in pink, it will be the GPSR provisions that apply. So you will always need to have this kind of screening into what applies and what residual part of GPSR applies to you. And then something that continues to apply no matter what, and which is not legislative, but central to EU product compliance in the EU and material compliance are the EN standards. And as a matter of fact, also ISO standards and other internationally recognized standards, they are used to show a presumption of compliance with the relevant safety parts of the GPSR. So if you have a standards that will show that, for example, your product is resistant to fire, if you follow a certain standard, that will be enough to prove that it's safe from that perspective under the GPSR. Okay, so it's a way to show your compliance. So it doesn't mean, again, that you cut off one set of provision to apply the other. No, it just means this still applies, but it's relevant to the GPSR in some context. Okay. So the first thing you got to do when you look at the GPSR is to spell the acronym properly and not write GSPR. Okay, so one more typo, sorry about that. The first thing you got to do is to look at the scope. And we've had many questions about scope. And here we put it at the simplest level, because of course, you're going to have sub-questions and borderline questions under any of those squares, because this is always what happens in our compliance jobs. You know how it goes. But it goes like this. First, it has to be a product under the scope of the GPSR. It has to be supplied in the course of a commercial activity. Is it placed or made available on the EU market? I should add here, for the first time. Is it intended for consumers or subject to a reasonably foreseeable consumer use? This one is the real kicker, because you're going to have many products placed on the market commercially, and there are products sometimes to professionals, but they are also used by consumers. All our friends from the construction industry know this. DIY stores that sometimes sell things that from the professional channel. That's your kind of examples. So even though you're not selling day to day to consumers, you might be in scope if foreseeably a consumer on a certain market may get their hands on the product. Then you have to look. That's only when you've done all of this that you look at which part you are excluded from the GPSR if you're already subject to a certain piece of legislation. So you don't start from that. That's the point. You don't go like, I'm covered by REACH. I don't have to go through the boxes. No, you have to go through all of this and then look at whether your chemical side here is covered by REACH. Okay. So to make it very simple, if you tick all of this, yes, it applies in full. Now, this is the part where I tell you it's more complicated than this slide. We have to keep it easy for the webinar. So when you have a complex scope question, there's going to be sub-questions and there's going to be a more complex flowchart to follow. And it's always going to be a result, like I said, a mix of provisions that apply from certain legislation and residual GPSR provisions. This is why we can't give you an answer on the air right now about your one product. We have to audit it. In some cases it's easy, in some cases it's not. So that's what to keep in mind. And this is where we can help. Now, this is another visual so that you don't have to open the legislation and read it article by article. You can start with that, let's say. So the GPSR is sort of structured in the way that it sets a certain number of concepts and of instruments and tools at all the points of the life cycle, if you want, of a product. So you have the whole conception and placing on the market phase, basically. So the safety requirements you have in the GPSR, they concern the product design and its contents. Articles 5 to 8. And then when you go to Article 9, you have all the obligations on the product listing. So this is all for those who operate as well, the marketplace or direct to consumer channels on their websites and things like that, or want to check if their, let's say their retailers are doing the right thing, because maybe you want to check that. This is the part of the GPSR that you look at. And this is where the risk assessment documentation and technical documentation, which is, I would say, like the big sort of novelty of the GPSR, where it's been really beefed up, if you will, comes into play. How do you describe the product online, and how do you describe the different kind of risks and safety features, let's say, that you've identified? Because no product will be 100% safe, okay? That's not what the GPSR is trying to look at. The GPSR wants you to document the risks and that everything is in there. So then what happens? What happens with that information? You have all the post-marketing is the next phase. It's chapters 4 and 6 of the GPSR. This is what happens when there's a problem and accidents happen. Accident will happen, shall we say. So you have the whole set of obligations on you if you identify a risk, if you are made aware of an accident or even of a risk, and the product has to be recalled quickly. And here you have a sort of beefed up set of obligations and tools at EU level to make sure that the product is taken off the shelf as quickly as possible and that all retailers are made aware. So this safety business gateway will be a bit like, for those who work in Reach, you have Reach IT and Euclid, right? So for consumer products, you have the safety business gateway. This is where you document anything that happens, anything that comes from your consumer support and so on. And Safety Gate, which is the same platform, but for member states. And it's really meant so that we catch all the accidents as quickly as possible, all incidents, okay? And then I've added here, it's not strictly in the GPSR, but that's the afterlife of all that, because it doesn't stop there. You have your liability rules. And I think it's useful to study the GPSR while also keeping in mind the product liability directive that goes with it. Because at the end of the day, even if nothing happens now, even if there's no product recall or accidents today, there could be one in the future during the service life, the use life of your product. And what the product liability directive does is, first of all, set record keeping obligations, 25-year record keeping obligations for your technical documentation under the GPSR, but also extends the burden of proof for companies in case of liability, but also the statutes of limitation, which means that an accident with your product could occur many, many years after it's been placed on the market or indeed purchased by a consumer, because actually your liability, I mean, it's going to be calculated from the moment someone is aware of a defect or a problem. So this is to keep in mind with your legal departments and so on, which means that your compliance today guarantees that you have no liability issue in the future. This is why today you need to, if you haven't documented under the GPSR, you have to do it now, because your liability already starts running. The legislation's already in force, you know, so things you place on the market today. So I think it's useful to have a reminder of that. I know that it's maybe a bit dark. I've put it in gray, but it's important. So I've got a private message from my colleagues that say, you're probably very late. You're speaking too much. I think that's what it is. The core duty is to have only safe products on the market. So this is what we were talking about, the safety. General safety obligation under Article 5. I want to drive it home for all of you here. Think about the vulnerable users. So forgive that I use pictures of kids on this PowerPoint presentation, but that's a bit how you should think about the use of your products. Here, she's using like a soldering kit. It looks a bit, the eyes are protected, but you know, accidents could happen. This is how we want to think when we look at the safety obligation. And indeed, it includes the chemical characteristics. So now when it comes to chemicals, this is definitely in scope of the safety rule. It's in the recitals of the GPSR, and it's in the enacting terms as well. So what we advise is that the chemical content and the exposure should be considered at the what we call the risk assessment under the GPSR and the technical documentation in ways maybe that you maybe haven't in the past. Okay. SDSs are a good tool to be, and they should be added in the technical documentation, no doubt about it. But in some cases, you will maybe need to go beyond that as well. And there was one little thing to say also, that the principle of precaution applies to the GPSR. So you have to really look for any risk that may foreseeably happen. So now the safety rule of the GPSR is translated into two things that you have to do under the legislation: this internal risk analysis and the technical documentation. So these are things that are non-negotiable. This is what you have to document in your technical documentation, okay? Description of the product, analysis of the risks related to use, essential characteristics relating to safety, inclusion of relevant standards and test results, identifying elements. This is important. So like a sort of unique identifier per product, unique product group that you place on the market. A single point of contact. It can be a functional email address, a phone number, but there needs to be somewhere at the company that people can reach out to and fast in case of accidents, and instructions for use. So your SDSs, they're going to cover a lot of that already. That's the good news. But again, your products may be articles with a chemical content or components and so on. So you will need to, in practice, use a lot of the technical documentation that you have under different pieces of legislation, could be construction products or toys or whatever, and put it, shall we say, under one roof. That's the idea of this technical documentation. So people have a look on your website and everything is preferably into one single document. So it becomes a bit like a super SDS if you want, okay? So this is where a subset of consultants already give this practical service to help collate the information. In our case, we have the sort of special expertise, let's say, for those who are chemical using or chemical formulating and so on, to maybe find the right fit, the right balance for you. So now we're going to look at the traps. And this is where we look at your questions at the same time. So the first trap when looking at the GPSR is to think we are REACH and CLP compliant, so we are safe. We've dealt with everything. No need to look at the GPSR. I think I've told you already before when we looked at the boxes, don't think like that. You've understood, I think, by now that this is not how it goes. So again, you need to look at the risk analysis anyway at the product level, whereas REACH deals with the substance level. Some products are covered by the restrictions, but that's not enough. So change your focus, and your technical documentation will include some elements of information you've generated in the REACH and CLP, but it's not going to be necessarily enough. Think also about voluntary schemes and product stewardship schemes that you already follow in some occasions, maybe in different markets. They can be relevant if they cover the consumer use, right? And that can be used for your technical documentation here. Trap 2. So now I'm beginning to think that the Q&A slides are at the end. Sorry about that. if I look at my deck, and they're coming. Trap 2 is it's not really a trap the way it's written here, but like, you know, what to check in your online presence. We got a lot of questions about that. So it's a good idea to take a subset of your products and audit them already to see like if you have, is the information consistent across your products line? Do you have clear warnings? Is there a way to identify the batches, like we said, you know, important that you identify individually the products? Because in case there's a problem also, an incident, that's gonna have, you're gonna need to individually identify your product in the safety business gate. So a bit like, you know, chemicals under REACH have a registration number. Here's the same for a product. Like the authorities need to have a way to track what's going on with your product. So this is important. You don't want to be caught by surprise when there's an incident. So the single point of contact, you know, who's responsible for updating content and so on, like to get your information always up to date. So you don't want to have like, you know, different channels in the company and then everyone looking at each other and the information stays, you know, not updated, not up to date. How quickly can you correct safety relevant information? The GPSR requires you to be quick and nimble. Another trap is to not have a clear recall incident process that speaks the language of the GPSR or that is GPSR ready. So again, fragmented handling of complaints and incidents, no clear trigger points, etc., etc. So I want to get us closer to the Q&A, but I just want to note it to make it clear to all of you that there are resources that you should definitely check on top of this webinar. There's very good guidance from the Commission notice here that is, we can send you the links also afterwards, but I think you can find it with this code, the SafetyGate website, and go look for the GPSR Academy on YouTube. You know, we're doing a bit of cross promotion to the EU Commission because they've done this basically. Those webinars go also in detail and they're very good. So I would suggest if you have some questions, you will get some answers there. National authorities have also produced good guidance. But then of course there's us, because your situation is unique always. And we will tailor, you know, the advice to your questions and also maybe beyond the official EU advice. Like sometimes they give you advice that is a bit generic to not, you know, because they can't think for everybody, but we can. And we can also give you actionable advice on what strategy to follow for your compliance, because sometimes you're going to have this fuzzy borderline issue. That's what we hear every day, and we can help with that. So map your products, review your risk assessment story, build a safety file, clean up your product information, and prepare your incident and recall playbook. These are the 5 steps you will have to do, but you're going to need help for that. Maybe. Let's see. So now, finally, the Q&A, and great if you can stay with us a bit more. Let's see. We still have 5 minutes to cover those, and really we've received a lot of questions from all of you in the form, so that's great. The top 1 questions we got from everybody was, does the GPSR apply to our products? So like I said, I can't give you like for every single one of you an answer like this on the air, but it's really going to be down to whether what you place on the market can be reasonably foreseeably used by a consumer, and it can be, for example, provided as part of a professional service. So for example, not something that you can buy but the consumer will be exposed. Okay, think about renovations in your house. This can be covered. So the GPSR is all about exercising your due diligence. So you're expected to have a broad interpretation of the rules as the company that is under the obligation. That's what this liability directive says. So the standards will be applied, if you will, the standard of application against you in court, if we want to say it very crudely. It's not going to be in favorable to the one who places on the market, because we want to protect the consumer. So if there's any way a product can be used by a consumer in even some sort of weird scenario, it's a good idea to have the technical documentation in place. What changes with EU manufacturer, importers, distributor, non-EU manufacturers? This is those classic chain of custodies issues where, again, come to us and we look at it. We audit for you, because maybe you're not the one who needs to fulfill the actual obligation. Your retailer is, or your importer also places on the market, etc., etc. But you have the information. So in the end, the duty falls on you as part of the chain of custody. So it could be that the legal obligation is not on you, but you need to generate the info. So for this, again, come to us, because this is familiar. If my products are already regulated, what remains of the GPSR? I think I've answered that to you before. I think I've hammered this one a lot today. So it's case by case, guys, okay? It doesn't exclude the general safety requirement and this presumption of safety for what you place on the market from the GPSR. That will always apply. And especially if you place on the market for consumers, so a detergent is a good example. If a consumer can buy that, well, you still need to have your technical information ready under the GPSR, even though you have all those labels and so on, blah, 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 under the detergent legislation, okay? Same for toys. Have the information on toys, technical documentation under GPSR ready, and your recall channels, all of that also ready. What about chemicals in articles? Are they products now? That was answered between the line. The GPSR doesn't think that way. The GPSR thinks about the products only. But if there's a chemical risk, it is covered by the GPSR. So it has to be documented. Okay? So it's not triggered by like automatically by a certain threshold or whatever. It's just if there's a safety element coming from your chemical, then yes. Documentation, risk, and online channels. We had a lot of questions as well. And here, I know that we're getting to the end, but we're going to continue with those questions for those. We are okay to continue. So for all of those who have to leave, thanks a lot for joining us. And you can catch this this whole bit on YouTube afterwards, and then book a meeting with me if any questions. So what does a GPSR compliant technical file look like for mixture and articles? It's going to have bits of your SDSs, but not only, and cover those risks that you can foresee during the consumer use. Again, we can't, it's too, you have to ask us basically with the specifics of your case. How do we connect the rich CLP data to product level safety? Well, again, there's going to be some bits like what you have documented in your SDS will be useful in some cases. Some test results or things that you can publicly disclose, of course. Anything that is relevant, for all these questions, let's make it simple. Put yourself in the shoes of the consumer. Is that relevant for them in their use? And also, is it easy for them to understand? So you have to balance also, you have to remember your audience, kind of, that it has to be an information that is easily accessible and tells people, okay, you have a risk when you handle the product in such or such way. You have to think of scenarios during the use, okay? Are people going to walk on this product? Are people going to use it on a surface with their bare hand? Then you explain there's irritation here, like your CLP classifications come in here, but you have to organize the information in a way that the whole sort of use cycle of a consumer is there. So all these questions also on the languages, there's a bit in the guidance that says, I think that you need, it's in the law actually, that it has to be in a language reasonably understood by the place where it's, by the people where it's placed on the market. So if it's placed on the market in a region in Italy where people are not expected to speak English, documentation in Italian, okay? So think like a consumer. Can we use QR codes? So this one, yeah, I've gotten a few times. So the whole technical documentation, it needs to be online. So you can have a QR code on the product, okay? But the QR codes, I think there are certain things that have to be on the product anyway, like the point of contact. So you can't have anything behind, everything behind the QR code. But the technical documentation, yes, because you're not expected to, it's not like CLP with the fold out labels, okay? You're not expected to paste like 15 pages of technical documentation to a rubber duck, okay? So it's online, so QR codes in principle, they help. Supply chain assessment, what must the non-EU manufacturers provide to the EU importers, but all the safety relevant information under the GPSR. Again, it's going to be a bit based on the use cases and the scenarios. So the authorized representatives, it's a bit similar to the ORs in REACH to a certain extent, let's say. But it's going to be for those situations where you need to appoint someone in the EU to take care of a number of your GPSR obligations and keep your file up to date and place it online, etc. So that's basically something that is available to you. It's not. It's again, case dependent. The last two questions, what customers expect from you, I would say rather ask yourself what the law expects from you, because the law is trying to read into the mind of the consumer. So that's where you're going to find it. And what's the first practical steps? Look again at my slide with the 5 steps, and then you get first beginnings of an answer. So it was, auditing your product line, looking at your communication channels in the company, risk assess what's not been risk assessed, etc., etc. But those 5 steps, I think they were quite pretty good. So I think I'm at the end of the slides. Not quite. For those who are still with us, it's just to say that REACHLaw can support, so we can help with your strategy for compliance, your technical documentation to an extent. We can help with what we're doing here, training and workshops in your companies, because in practice, it's going to be, a set of colleagues have to work on this together. So it's good to get your teams all updated, because it's not complicated stuff, but it's stuff that has to be done. And then you don't want them to fall into the traps, the 3 traps. Sectoral guidelines drafting. This is something that we have done for one sector already. It's quite nice to have one document if you are a trade association that sums up the baselines of what needs to be done, so that everyone kind of follows at least a baseline in their approaches. Especially for certain product families, you're going to have some similarities in what you need to document. So maybe that makes sense, because then you don't have one company documents more than the other, etc. You want to be a bit aligned in your safety approaches. This is all the set of what we do at the REACHLaw case team. It's lovely. We help you with a lot of regulatory intelligence stuff and so on. I'm going to skip over that, and then we can still take your questions for 8 minutes. We only got one question in the chat. Everyone has been either it's been extremely clear or you're being a bit shy. It's one of the two. Is GPSR a copy of the food safety law? I would say no. There are some elements that resemble it. So I don't really know food safety laws enough to answer your questions. But these food safety laws, they would fall actually a bit more into this, those specific. You remember we had a box for the harmonized legislations. So food is something you ingest, right? So it has a set of very tight requirements, but also that have to do with food as such. So not only the safety, but also what you can put on the label and so on. So the methodology looks the same, but I wouldn't say it's a copy, because the GPSR is meant to be like overarching, looking at the consumer use, so there are some links, but again, I think the quick answer to this question is like, don't assume that because you follow food safety laws that GPSR doesn't apply, because it could be that the product as packaged, there can be elements of it. I don't really know what's behind this question, but again, it's a trap to just think GPSR does not apply at all to your situation. It's good to look at the scenarios in detail. I hope this replied your questions. I see none in addition in the chat. So on this, I can close the webinar. Before I do, I just want to thank all of you. Of course, I'm always focused on the presentation, but I saw every now and then on our GoToWebinar a few clapping hands and little hearts and so on. So this is nice feedback and it's always appreciated. And then, okay, and then I got more now. So this is very kind of you. But all right, thanks again for today. Get in touch. You have the link in the chat, and have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.